Good evening. It is Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019, 7 o'clock p.m. I'd like to call to order the Town of Sutton Board of Selectmen's meeting. If you'd all rise and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Technical difficulties. We good now? We'll give it a try. Next up is public forum. Public forum is limited to 5 minutes per topic. Discussion or comments about town employees or agency members shall be avoided so as not to violate individuals' rights. Is there anyone here for public forum? Seeing no one. Next are our Board of Selectmen's minutes. We have two tonight. So first we have the minutes from July 9th.
I would make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to approve the minutes from our July 9th meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for our July 9th, 2019 minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 4-0.
And one abstention.
Well, just nobody here, so. And then second, we have the goals and objectives minutes from July 16th.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to accept the goals and objectives minutes from July 16th, 2019.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And that passes 4-0. All right, next up is a public hearing, a poll hearing for Mendon Road. And I'll declare the public hearing open and invite our acting clerk to read the notice into the record.
As posted in the Millbury Sutton Chronicle on July 11th, 2019. In accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 166, Section 22, you are hereby notified that the public hearing will be held at Sutton, 7 p.m. on Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019, in the Sutton Town Hall upon petition from National Grid for permission to install one SO pole on Mendon Road beginning at approximate 2,065 feet east of the center line of the intersection of Putnam Hill Road and continuing approximately 20 feet in a southern direction. National Grid to install a 35C2 for new service at 172 Mendon Road. Also for permission to lay and maintain underground laterals, cables, and wires in the above or intersecting public ways for the purpose of making connections with such poles and buildings as the petitioner desires for distribution purposes. Plan file herewith marked number 284-27789.
Thank you. And we have a representative here from National Grid. Jim, I don't know if you have anything you want to
Just
say
let
about
you, I think this one's pretty easy. It's a new pole location to service a new home built at 172 Mendon Road. This is formerly George Kowzik's property that we went through releasing the 61A back probably a year ago. And police, fire, and highway are okay with this.
Great. So if you can just introduce yourself and just anything you might have to add to this would be great.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Diego Villarreal. I'm an engineer with National Grid. And I think the only thing that I might want to add to this is the 35C2, which is 35 is the how tall the pole is, and C2 means class 2. That's the thickness of the pole. That's the only thing that might be a little confusing there, but besides that, I think everything is in there.
Great. So typically we just open it up to the board to ask any questions they might have. So Wendy, that would be you if you'd like to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have no questions. I'm familiar with the site, and I think it makes sense, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jonathan?
No, I don't have any questions either. I'm all set.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one curiosity type question. The 35C2, is 35 the standard height?
We have different sizes of poles. The 35 is a standard for a secondary service for a house that only carry a secondary wire,
Okay.
meaning 120 and 240 volts.
Okay,
So that would be
okay. I have no-
standard for residential service.
I have nothing further.
Okay. No, I don't actually have any questions. I want to appreciate the little extra information. We usually get all of these terms and sometimes.
Yeah,
don't know
yeah.
what they mean.
Sometimes a little confusing if you see 35 C2.
Yeah.
You know.
Now, this is a public hearing, so is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak to this? I don't hear anybody, so we need to close the public hearing, so I'll take a motion for that.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to approve poll hearing number 284-27789 from National Grid as advertised in the July 11th, 2019 Millbury Sutton Chronicle.
Thank you. I'm going to put that motion on hold for a moment, so before we do that, we just need a motion to actually close the public hearing.
That's right.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing on the poll hearing for the national.
Second.
That's a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
That's 4-0. So now we have Wendy's motion for the actual poll vote. So I need a second for that.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That passes 4-0. Thank you very much. We appreciate you
Thank
coming
you.
in.
Thank you.
For coming in.
Next up, we have a one-day beer and wine license. We're starting with Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce. Is this a public hearing? I don't think it is, right?
No, it's not.
just a vote. Do we have any representatives from Blackstone here?
We don't. We were expecting one. Jeannie Hebert couldn't make this meeting, and she was gonna send a representative. Because that representative isn't here, I would recommend that the board postpone action on this and maybe
Yeah.
till August 6th, and then we can have a representative from the chamber to attend. The event doesn't take place until August 21st, so there's plenty of time, but I'd just rather have a representative here from.
Yeah, certainly. I think this board would have plenty of questions, so I think not having a representative to answer wouldn't be good. So what's the term? We'll pass over this without prejudice? Is that the correct legal term?
Just skip it.
All right, we'll go to
Unless you want the full Roberts Rules breakdown, I'll be happy to give that to you.
Next up is Dudley Gendron, Post 414. They have two events that they're looking for one-day licenses. So Dave, if you'd like to come up. Jim, I don't know if you'll have anything to add first, or we just let Dave do it.
Yeah, I know.
I'll
I'm
pass my
Dave.
time to Dave Karasias.
Dave, for the record, if you can just introduce yourself.
Dave Karasias, a manager of the Dudley General Post 414. So we have two events coming up, and as we did last year as well. So we have the MS, it's a cornhole tournament, and that is actually on July 28th, which is this coming Sunday. We had it last year, and there's a little bit of a added thing too. The Legion Riders are going to have a ride that day, and all the money that they raise is also going to go towards the MS.
Nice.
And registration is at 9 a.m. If any of you have motorcycles that you want to. And it's $15 a rider. To get into the cornhole is $20 per person, and it's a good event. Last year was very, very warm, but we have tents set up, so hopefully we'll have a good turnout, and it's always for a good cause. And there'll be a few raffles going on as well. So that's this Sunday. And then our annual chicken barbecue, which is on September 21st. We have that every year. This year, I'm not sure if you all know that the Auburn Post, Tuttle Post burnt down. So the proceeds are gonna go to them. So we're gonna have the normal chicken and hamburgers and hot dogs, and the Lions Club are gonna be involved as well. And we also have another added, the Wilkinsville, that park that they're doing in Wilkinsville.
Unity
Park.
Yeah, right. They're also having the whole field is gonna be for children. So they're gonna have a bunch of events for children. They're gonna have an ice cream truck And so they're trying to raise money. So we're always trying to involve different organizations in town. But most of the money that, all the money that we raise from the chicken barbecue is going to the Tuttle Post to rebuild. They finally, it was a tragic event. They had, fortunately, no one was injured in that, but the fire started. There was probably over 200 people in the building at the time. And everyone got out safely. It was a faulty wire up in the attic or something that started the fire. But it's a total loss. And they finally negotiated with all the insurance companies, and they're ready to move. So we felt, as part of the Legion community, that we should dedicate this to them.
Nice.
So that's what we're doing.
Okay,
So.
great. So like we did last time, I think I'd like to open it up to the board if I can. So Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will assume, based on the prior events that we've already approved, that there's no deviation from the norm, same police safety patrols, everything.
Now, do I have to go to lockdown, or you guys with the police? Should I go down to the police station and make sure that, I'll take care of that this
Yeah, I
week?
would check with Chief.
Yeah, because I have in the past, and, yeah, okay, so.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, I think it's incredibly generous and gracious that you're donating the funds. I think that's a worthwhile cause.
We always try to have some focus.
Yeah, so kudos to you. You've been a great supporter of the community.
Thank
and
you.
Obviously, you're looking beyond just the Sutton community, so thank you for that. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I definitely am in support of both of these events. I mean, it's great what you do for the community and the fundraising that you do, for charity. And I think it's just wonderful that you're giving the proceeds from the chicken barbecue to the Tuttle Post. I remember watching that on the news, and
Yeah.
just, that was
It
really terrible.
Really,
Yeah.
All I think about is if the does burn down, what do you do?
Yeah, right.
So
Yeah.
it's a close-knit community.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And, this is something you've been holding, especially the barbecue for years. And
Yep.
so, as long as things stay in line with what you've been doing,
Yep.
I have no real questions or problems. I mean, you've been doing
Thank
this
you.
for a long time, and you understand the rules and what's needed. So,
Mhm.
Thank you.
thank
Jeff?
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to echo also what Jonathan and Wendy said just about dedicating the proceeds to the
Mhm.
Tuttle Post. I mean, I think that's commendable. Just as a point of clarification, this particular license is for an outside,
That's correct.
which is different than what they already have?
Yeah, we have an inside. So it's beer and wine, and it's being able to serve outside.
So you do need a separate for the
Yes.
Yeah.
outside piece? Okay, that's just a clarification.
And, there are other rules that we have, which
We have to have a
Dave
police
is
Yes,
aware
yeah,
of.
I was aware of that, I just didn't see anything on the inside-outside thing. I think, I'm also in support of this as well, full support of it. Just a question though, how many people do you normally expect?
Well,
two different
with
events.
this one, it's been growing every year.
Mhm.
So I go by chickens. I'm the guy who cooks the chickens. We started off with 150 meals.
Yep.
Last year, we went up to 200 and we sold out. This year, we're going to 250. And so
That's
hopefully we
exciting.
sell out.
Nice.
How about the other event? What do you anticipate for?
That last year wasn't that large, so I haven't got a number on how many people, but I wouldn't anticipate it being like an overabundance. If there's 75 people, I'd be surprised.
Good. Nothing further.
Great, thank you. Dave, welcome back.
Mhm.
Thank you for coming as always. It's interesting timing because we had our goals meeting last week and we talked a lot about one-day licenses. So although you've done this a ton of times, I got a couple of questions,
Yeah.
maybe just for some clarification to
Sure.
help us as we move forward. So in your case, because you already have a beer and wine license, do you just use
We
your
have a
own
full liquor
people?
license.
A full liquor license, yeah, I'm sorry. Do you use your own people to serve at these events?
Actually, for the MS, because it's a fundraiser, last year I bartended myself.
Okay.
And it's always our own people. I never have any outside people that aren't tip certified. No, it's
Yeah.
all, yeah.
And I guess that's where I was leading. Your people
Yeah,
are
no, it's
already tip
always tip
certified, so they
certified,
come
yeah.
in knowing the rules.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I try to get, when it's a fundraiser like that, I try to get bartenders to donate their time.
Yeah.
If I can't, then I do it myself.
Right. So I didn't go to the other event, but I've been to the chicken barbecue, and it's a great time. It's a lot of fun. It's great that you're adding more things to it.
Yeah.
To become even a larger community
I
event.
think getting the children involved out
Yep.
in the field.
Sure.
And I think that's gonna be great, and it raises money for those folks
Yep.
as well.
Now, last year, the timing and the weather and all that kind of stuff didn't work out well for a dunk tank. I don't know if you're planning to.
Yeah, dunk tank, we did that the first year because, remember, we were raising money for the fire department
Right.
for thermal imaging, which we did. We raised $10,000. Having said that, the Spencer Fire Department donated.
The dunk tank.
Right.
Yeah.
So then we looked into renting one and the cost, and it just wasn't
Didn't work out, yeah.
prudent to do that. It's always, cost compared to profit.
Well, anyway, I too, appreciate, you just mentioned the thermal imaging, the proceeds from these events have gone to really
Yeah.
great causes and obviously are continuing to go to great causes.
Mhm.
So, that really is great work on your part, and we appreciate that. So I don't really have any other questions. And so with that, absent any other questions, I'll turn it over for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would make a motion to approve the request for 2 special one-day outside beer and wine licenses at the Dudley General Post number 414, located at 156 Boston Road, for Sunday, July 28, 2019, between the hours of 12 noon and 4 p.m., as well as Saturday, September 21, 2019, between the hours of 12 noon and 4 p.m., with a police officer detail on site at each event.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
4-0. Dave, thank you very much. Good luck with the event.
Before I leave, I'd like to just say a couple of things. Because my involvement with the Legion, and I get involved with other legions and know what's going on, we are very appreciative of what this town does in support of us and support of the veterans. You stand way above many, many towns, and it's sad to say there's a lot of towns that aren't as supportive as you are, and it is greatly appreciated. And I was very impressed with the 4th of July event. I mean, I put on events all the time, not as big as that, and I have to say that the town supported it. The committee that was formed, I have to say, this is a great town, and keep doing what you're doing.
Same to you.
Thanks.
Thanks very
you.
much,
Yeah.
Dave. We appreciate it. Okay, so next we're on to our Green Community MVP update with Doreen DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doreen's going to do a presentation for the MVP grant, Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant, easy to say. And she'll give us a brief update on the Green Communities grant.
Great.
Typically about this time we get the award, but
I'll get into that a
yeah.
little bit.
Well, I don't know if it's premature to say, but like we said earlier, Jesse's not here to say,
Yeah,
you
well, that's
must
They're
be
bringing
bringing
us
us
more
money.
money, yeah. Good evening. So,
Welcome.
like Jim said, this is usually the time every year, an opportunity to for me to speak about the different things that we're doing in my part-time department. So I'm going to start with the Green Communities grant and then maybe take questions, and then I'll move on to the presentation for the MVP, which is a one-time grant project. Okay. So back in March, we applied for 3 projects for the school complex and 1 for the senior center. So for the school, it was $90,000 for 2 water heaters, and then $125,000 to put toward a chiller also at the school. And the cost of the chiller is $225,000. So our plan is to use, to allocate $100,000 from the capital budget and have $125 in Green Communities grants. And then we also applied for an electric vehicle for the senior center. So the total of the entire grant application was $249,765. So since that time, a couple of things have happened. DOER came back to us and decided that they're not funding cars this year, not funding electric vehicles. I don't really know the exact reasons why, because there was a big push for it, which is why we went for it in the first place. But Jim and I have had this discussion and talked about moving forward what we'll do for next year to get a car for the senior center. So that's taken off the application. And then we had an emergency with one of the water heaters at the school, and it had to be replaced immediately. So I called our rep from DOER and said, you know, what happens in this situation? And unfortunately, since it's already replaced, we can't get grant funding for that. So with those two projects off, we're anticipating approximately $203,000 in grant funding from DOER. So we're eliminating half of $90,000, $45,000, and then approximately $34,000 from the electric vehicle. So I spoke to our rep today. The more years that go by and the more communities that join this Green Communities program, the later the date gets and when we get our grant award, which makes sense. I mean, they have a lot of communities, and the application is getting more competitive. So we haven't heard anything to the contrary that we're not getting this award. They first said last week of July, so I reached out today, and then they're still hoping for that, but it could go into the first week or two in August. So as soon as we find out, actually typically Jesse comes with me to the State House or wherever we go to get the award, so we'll make sure you know as soon as we know. And we're also, this was a separate application but has to do with Green Communities. We applied for through DEP EVIP program for 2 charging stations. And unlike the charging stations that are here at Town Hall, we're looking to get charge point charging stations, which means we can actually, there will be, what's fast charge, and also we can charge for them as well. And so we're looking to put one at the school complex and one at the senior center. So the senior center will obviously go along, or our vision was for that to go along with the electric vehicle, and also a place where residents could charge their cars. And then we thought the school complex would be an ideal place, whether it be parents watching games, or teachers or community using that. It's a well-lit area, so we've actually already started scoping out potential areas with a vendor. So that's really what we're at like right now. I was hoping that I could show up tonight and tell you that we already have this money in hand, but we're still patiently waiting. But that's where we stand. So are there any questions? I have the narratives with me from the grant application, so if there's any details about any of these projects, I'm happy to answer those questions.
Okay. Wendy, anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As always, thank you for your description of the timeline of events. I know it's probably been very frustrating for you. But everything you've relayed makes perfect sense, understanding that projects that are already completed are sort of off the grant table.
Mm-hmm.
But as always, just thank you for your efforts, and I guess it works out well that Jesse isn't here, because next time you can relay to us that the funds have come in, Jesse will step right up, so that will be perfect. But thank you just so much for everything, as always.
Thank you, Wendy.
Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Doreen, for, again, this work that you do. It's very important, and it gives us access to money that's out there for, at least for the towns that are in this program, and it's money that, we wouldn't, if we didn't go after it, we wouldn't get it, it would go somewhere else. So just really appreciative of the work that goes into it, the amount of effort. Writing grants is often challenging, and then waiting and seeing and keeping up on that is really important. And just appreciate that. It is disappointing that we're not going to be able to get some of this other money in the car this year, but I understand, and but it makes sense. And so I think it'll be good that when you do announce that Jesse will be here and he can be excited about it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the update, Doreen. Just a question, are there guidelines on the grants? So for instance, the chillers were 2 1/4.
Mm-hmm.
Can we take some of the money that we lost on the 45 and add that to that, the 125 to the chiller?
No, because the deadline for the grant had already passed. And so a couple things on that. As the grant becomes more competitive, we have been informed we're more likely to get grant funding if we're matching big projects. So that's why Jim and I had spoken and determined, instead of saying let's go all in with this chiller for 225, we may not have gotten the funding, and we want and need the chiller replaced. And so the first part is to kind of show in good faith that the community is not just asking for replacement of items that are breaking down, but we're looking for energy efficient replacements, and that we're also willing to step up and fund part of the project. So that's why we went for 125 instead of any more than that. The second part of it is they're very strict down to the exact hour of when that grant is due. And there's no changes unless they come forth with a question of amendment, which they typically do. It goes to a review committee, and then typically about a month later, they come back from the review committee with certain questions for me in more detail. And again, they'll give me 48 hours to answer this, by close of business, and those questions have to be answered. So I didn't go and ask if it can be moved, but this is, I think, my 4th or 5th grant application with the town. And so, I think it probably the request would have been denied.
Then the other question was really for Jim. Did we, in the capital plan, do we have the full 225?
No, we purposely budgeted 100,000 for the town's share of the, approximately 225, 230,000, and we've applied for what, 150?
125.
125 from the state. So.
I just couldn't remember if it was the net amount or the gross amount of the chiller.
Yeah, it was the net amount. Okay. The beauty of this program is, we've been able to replace a lot of equipment, particularly down at the school department, that it's at its end of life. A couple of boilers, the chillers, all this kind of infrastructure, HVAC infrastructure that we would need to fund ordinarily out of our capital fund. But the Green Communities Grant gives us that opportunity to not only save electricity, but also to get funding as well.
Yep. And what's the total grant dollars right now, including this, that we would be receiving?
Oh, over $1 million. So
Yeah,
I'll have that number
big
once
number.
the grant comes in. I was
Yeah.
going to mention that at the end. So over $1 million since 2011 that
Yeah.
we've received, which
That's
is
great.
huge. And that's just the grant funding, like Jim was saying. That's not even the savings. I also want to make mention to note with the chiller that the facilities manager down at the school, Roger Raymond, realized that the current chiller that was working is working at about half capacity, and it's doing well. So the replacement chiller is a smaller one, so we'll use less electricity than what we're using, and we're actually, the cost is less than what the replacement of the chiller is. So there was, a team of people, but not just myself, that did a lot of effort and research, a lot of people. I could name, the building commissioner, Jim, and, to really kind of pull a team together and look at this to make sure that we're asking for what we need and the savings will be there. It's not just a, apples to apples replacement on this project, so it was really great.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think we can say this loud enough. $1 million worth of grant funding for items that we would have had to pay for anyway. And on top of which, because of the green nature of what it is we're buying, we're getting significant electricity savings from having done this work. It is really valuable work to the town. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It's just savings, savings, savings. That's why Jesse gets so excited about this.
Yeah.
He should.
Well, I do too.
Yeah,
So, I
yeah,
mean,
exactly.
I love my position here, and it's fun.
One of the things that I think you've been so successful about is the time to turn around these grants, right? So we work hard to get a grant in, get the grant money, actually spend the money so that by the next year when the grants turn around
Correct.
again, we're ready.
Correct.
We've already spent the money and we're eligible for new projects. So it's a little concerned that their process is slowing down. Does that make it harder for you to actually achieve that kind of thing?
Well, again, I mean, the school has been proactive in trying to, line this up. I mean, things like replacement in the school, we have to work with the school schedule and timing, but all of these projects should be pretty seamless. So they'll definitely be done before the deadline.
Because I assume there's always more things to do.
And your point is well taken. I mean, if this schedule goes, the funding schedule goes to mid-August or early September, it becomes really hard to get all these projects done by the end of December, which
Yeah.
is the time frame
Yeah.
that we're required to meet, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to have, I have to have a final report in by mid-January, and then the new application by the beginning of March. That's when it was due.
Yeah.
So it is a quick turnaround.
Yeah, they're making it even more challenging.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned, we, maybe we've benefited over time by the fact that there aren't that many green communities, or there weren't that many green communities. Now there are more and more green communities coming along. So not only is that, I guess that's more people competing for available funds, are they increasing the amount of funds available for grants, or is it really one
No.
pool and everybody's?
No, it's one pool capped at $250,000. I don't know if that'll change. Again, I credit the regional coordinator, Kelly Brown, that we work with. She's a great communicator. Make sure that I have all my questions answered to make sure the grant is out on time. And, I spoke to her briefly today to get an update, and she responded immediately, even though probably in the midst of going through all these grants. So,
Yep.
Again, it's sort of a team of people. I kind of, hold all the material, but a lot of people help push it through and make sure that we're staying on track, so.
Yeah, I guess it's just a concern if we've benefited so much from these green community grants in the past, and now there are more people competing for limited resources,
Sure.
if they might look at us and say,
Sure.
you've already sort of had your bite at the apple and it'll be harder for us to get grants. I guess we'll
Well,
see.
This is why we had the discussion about, the chiller, like matching the chiller. That was her recommendation, moving forward with more competition, that if we went forward and just said, yeah, Sutton needs a new chiller, please give us $200,000 or $225,000, that we may have been pushed aside for something like that. But
Right.
when you're proving that you're matching a project, that looks better. So, and things like they seem to choose every year what priority projects are. So, unfortunately, vehicles is off. LED lights is something that we've done a lot of LED lights. We may not have gotten funding for that. So she really keeps us informed on, what to target.
Where to
So,
look.
yeah.
Great. Well, thank you.
No, thank you.
So if you want to move on to the
Great.
MVP stuff, you have a presentation?
We do.
He does.
Yeah.
Oh, can slide over.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, just pull.
I'm gonna turn off the lights. Bob, can you get the lights? Just
So, again, just like the green communities, I'll go through this public presentation, and any questions at the end that you have, I'm happy to answer them. So, this is, you may be familiar with the Community Resilience Building, what the state calls MVP project. I sent you all a copy of the written report that will be going to the state. And this public presentation is also, just for your information, required by the state as well that we hold. So, I thank you for, letting me have it, being part of the meeting too, so it's televised and other residents are able to look at this. All right, so what I'm going to do in this presentation is just talk about the background on what MVP is, and then talk about the workshop objectives, what the findings were, what our next steps are with this project, and then take questions, like I said. So back in 2016, the governor signed an executive order mandating that all local level cities and towns support climate change resiliency planning, and came up with grant funding for this, and they called it Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness, MVP. So in April of 2017, this program was launched by EEA, Energy and Environmental Affairs Division, and the completion of this project, so the first part of the project were the workshops that were held. The second part of the project was the report that you were given, and the third part of the project is this presentation. And so the completion of this would designate us, very similar to green communities, as an MVP community and offer us a preference in additional state grants through the EEA division. So in 2018, Sutton applied to become an MVP community and was awarded a grant to fund these town designation requirements. And on the cold days of February 7th and 8th this year, we held a 2-day workshop. So we decided to break them up into, the workshop was 6 hours, and there was a lot of staff involved, so we decided to break it up into 2 days, and we held it at the Blackstone National. They were nice enough to donate the room to us and also participate in the workshops. So the workshop's goals were to identify hazards that Sutton has been or could be intensified by climate change, and prioritize these actions. So we had approximately 24 community members attend this 2-day workshop, which, looking at other communities, is a really good turnout for a town the size of Sutton. So again, the workshop objectives were to define these natural and climate-related disasters, and look at our strengths as well as vulnerabilities as a community, and prioritize these actions for the town of Sutton. And once we were able to do this, we can identify immediate opportunities to, kind of take action and increase resilience within the town. So back in 2016, there was actually another report that you may remember called the Hazard Mitigation Plan. And this was completed right before I started working here. And Paul Maynard was kind of leading this. So Paul and I met quite a bit to talk about this hazard mitigation plan. And based on conversations I had with EEA and conversations with Jim and people who were part of the core team for the hazard mitigation plan, we felt that the town had already identified the hazards for the community, and that we wouldn't take the time to kind of, go over that whole process again, and we would just take what was identified from the hazard mitigation plan and use those as our top hazards. So So these that were identified are from that plan that CMRPC did back in the end of 2016. So flooding, any type of winter storms, and then droughts and wildfires came up as the top hazards in our region and specifically in the town. So what EEA under this MVP grant asked us to do is break down based on infrastructure, societal vulnerabilities and strengths, and environmental vulnerabilities and strengths. So what I did is I kind of gave an overview in a PowerPoint presentation, and then we had a large group discussion that was facilitated on how each hazard was impacting Sutton. So going back to that hazard mitigation list, you know, how are these things impacting Sutton in the past, and what are our concerns for the future? And then we had, I think it was three or four small tables, maybe, I think four. And so we, and I carefully placed who was sitting where. I had assigned seats for people, so there would be, you know, interesting discussions in small groups to identify these different features of the town that related to the hazards from the hazard mitigation plan. And as you can see, one of the scribes there, so those sheets were given to us by the state to actually fill in and identify. So the infrastructural vulnerabilities that came up, these are the main ones that again are listed in the reports you have. So dams were a big one, and this is in no particular order at this time. So Manchog and Stevens Pond. Manchog sits upstream from Stevens Pond, and Stevens Pond Dam has become a priority as it is currently leaking. There's some culvert concerns with steel pipes in town. And then the last column there really both relates to trees. So narrow roadways and trees, you know, can pose a problem in ice storms or wind, and especially if the trees go down, it could be difficult, especially with emergency management, getting vehicles through, and also power outages, you know, if any of these trees can affect downlines as well. And then additional vulnerabilities were the transite pipe on Blackstone Street at the sewer pump. So there's an old pipe that was built in 1975. And from information from our sewer director, he said that typically there's a backup line, there's a backup pipe, so there's usually two side by side. This does not have that, so there's only one with no backup pipe. And if the sewer pump is interrupted by flooding or any type of breakage from this old pipe, there is absolutely no backup. And there's a potential to have all of Wilkinsonville Village without any sewer function. And then another one that came up, mainly from a public health standpoint, is any sort of insect-borne disease at warmer weather. And more rain has led to increased mosquito population, increased tick-borne illnesses, and such that, you know, can be a threat to residents as well. And then societal vulnerabilities. What came up is separation of parents and kids, an emergency situation, you know, cell phone service, being in a rural community, and no cell service at the school complex. That food supply is potentially limited, that even the grocery store in town doesn't, you know, stock enough supplies for a long-term emergency. You know, since this is a rural community, we rely on cars as a primary method of transportation. And then, of course, our older population, you know, with limitations, and, you know, how would we handle an emergency situation with them. And then lastly, environmental vulnerabilities. Open reservoirs, which are privately owned, is responsible for the water district surface water and has limited security. Drought impacts local businesses such as farms and golf courses like the one we were on that day, and there's a need for these businesses to use additional water during a drought to maintain crops and their business. Tree maintenance can be difficult to maintain, that we have approximately $35,000 budgeted to maintain about 11,000 trees. And because they can pose an environmental vulnerability, we don't feel like, there's a lot of dead trees in town and potential hazards, and we don't necessarily have the funding every year to make sure that those vulnerabilities are taken care of. And flooding, this kind of goes back to the transpite. Failed septic is a big concern. So then the good news, strengths and assets in the community. So we have a highway system, Route 146, that has easy access to Worcester and Providence and can serve as evacuation routes. We have upgraded communication systems such as Code Red and the police communication system upgrade. We have a school generator upgrade. We have, the community seems to have a lot of confidence in town leadership. And Sutton has a strong sense of community service and is a town that's very neighborly. So, most people help each other out in emergency situations, and so those are definitely strengths of the town. We also have really good partnership and mutual aid. Sutton assists and is part of emergency management and public health regionalization plans and services. We have a really robust senior center program, which also houses the town's food bank. Kind of a contradiction about the trees. In higher temperatures, even though we, have some dead trees that could come down onto roadways, in a heat, tree canopies can really serve as shade in severe heat and could reduce heat islands too. So, again, this is, feedback from different groups. So, some people can see it as an issue. Other people can see it as a strength, which is why they're both reported here. So, multiple water sources from lakes, ponds, and rivers. And Sutton has really good snow removal services, which, because this effort is putting in and taking these proactive measures, it's easier for first responders to get around in bad snowstorms. The highway supervisor told me that, as soon as a storm is coming, like, they're out there. They don't wait until a couple inches hit the ground and then they start plowing. They're out there getting it done. So that's definitely a strength. Excuse me. So then what we did was we went through a DOT system workshop where I listed out all of the things that were mentioned, and everybody got a few stickers and had to go up and identify what their priorities were, and those priorities were counted up, and these are the priorities that came out of this workshop. So priority 1, according to this workshop, was trees, and that we need, to work on our inventory of hazard trees and perhaps apply for more grants to work on just maintaining the trees that could be a hazard, and to consider capital funding for one-time maintenance to just go through the entire community. And then, just work in conjunction with the highway department and the tree warden, same person, Matt Stencil, to kind of develop a plan moving forward. And another thing that came up was addressing over-salting, because it impacts root structures and can also affect trees, making them die. So, and then invasive species, which I mentioned before. So priority number 2 is the transite pipe. And Wilkinsonville pipe has already had one break and threatened to have another one is looming. So a thought was to have a camera identify the integrity of the pipe as it currently stands, and then see, and then additional impact from the center of town is going to add more pressure to this pipe. So that's definitely a high priority. Number 3 was town generators. And we talked about the Senior Center Housing Authority, even though it's state funded, this does not have a generator and it's a vulnerable population. So we wanted to see what we could do to get a generator there. And Fire Station 2 has a 40-plus-year-old with limited capacity. Wilkinson Water Tower, which has a radio system and water system. Manchog Water Tower, radio system and water system. The Simonian Center, the Highway Department, which also has our town fuel supply. And one of the solutions that was brought up was perhaps investing in 1 or 2 mobile generators that can be towed around to different locations around town. And priority number 4, so just to clarify too, the state was looking for the top 3, but dam maintenance and town generators had a tie, so I put them both in. So dam maintenance, Manchog Dams and Stevens Pond do have an existing trust fund for maintenance, and we need to appropriate for necessary work, and then evaluating all culverts and dams to prioritize the needs and seek funding for those. So what are the next steps after this goes to the state? So currently, if we look at what our priorities are based on this workshop, we know that Stevens Pond Dam needs work, and we are currently requesting $17,000 appropriation at this fall town meeting for fixing of that dam. Trees, the request for appropriation for a capital plan item is planning on being presented at Maytown meeting. So that would mean and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be to go through the entire town and, do an evaluation of the entire town's needs to kind of, start at a starting point of clearing out all the hazardous trees. And so we look for funding for that through our capital plan. The transite pipe, we currently have a camera that will be looking at the transite pipe in the next couple of weeks, and that's going to show us the integrity of the pipe. And this would potentially be a great application for this grant funding from EEA, where we think that, adding a second pipe could cost millions, right? Or at least $1 million. So this would be, a potential grant through EEA once we have, this status to apply for. And then the generators is something too, knowing that this is a priority for the town and that this has come up as a priority, considering for capital funding for Maytown meeting as well, and making it one of the priorities for capital. So that's all I have. I'm happy to, I know that's a lot of information, and I want to first of all thank the board for your support on this, and thank Jim as well, and Lee Dillard Adams, who is a resident in Sutton. She actually brought this grant to the town's attention, and helped me with the application, came forward and said, I think this is really important for the town to do. And I sat down with Jim, and he gave me the go-ahead. And so it was exciting for me to kind of go out of the green communities world and sort of expand on the whole sustainability things that I was doing. And it's like, an opportunity that we could apply for even more grants and get more money for the town. So I want to thank Lee for bringing this to the town's attention. There's many communities surrounding us that went through the first round of MVP. One of them is the town of Millbury, who just received a large award this past week. So I'm really glad that we're in a good place in this process to be in the same boat.
Great. Thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation.
Yes.
So as always, I'll turn it over to the board. So Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for mentioning the Millbury grant, because that was one of my questions. We all know they just got $1 million grant. How does that align with the program that you're running? There are similar issues. I guess I'm just not quite sure why they're at one spot and we're at another, and I'm just trying to figure out how to align that.
Sure thing, yeah. They applied a year earlier than us. So they went through the process in this whole presentation exactly a year ago.
Okay.
And so it opened up in, it says in the report, I believe 2017 they applied, and we applied in 2018. So
Okay.
it started in 2017, and they actually regionalized. So Millbury, Grafton, and Northbridge went in and did sort of a regionalization plan, but kind of broke off for their own projects.
Okay.
And Sutton thought about doing it, but we decided to go solo, which is the norm. Most communities are doing it that way. Sort of after talking to those communities, I didn't really see any benefit in, regionalizing, because we're still looking for, like the transite pipe, for example, that's a Sutton issue, right? So they're just a year ahead on us.
Okay, that's a great explanation, I just wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Sort of where we ended up. Interesting that you were talking about the tree maintenance, that was one of the items that came up at our goals meeting, because there are a lot of aged trees, as lovely as they are, that pose significant risks. So I'm really happy to see that was one of the primary goals. I found it really interesting, two of the things that you talked about, the insect-borne disease. I think a lot of us think of these insects as nuisances, but not necessarily as disease carriers. So I think it's really wonderful that you honed in on that, because it is a critical issue. And the septic issues in Wilkes with the transite pipe, that's huge. And there's a lot of discussion about building up the commercial sector over there, but there's so many parts of our infrastructure that are potentially at risk or not able to maintain necessarily a certain amount of growth, that I'm really glad to see that this is really, where you guys are focusing on. I commend you wholeheartedly. I do recall how cold those days were. And thank you to Blackstone,
Yes.
not only for participating, but for offering the space.
Yes,
And-
and lunch, and
That's right,
breakfast the
food.
next day.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
huge. And
Huge.
I think that they offer really a unique perspective as well as a large golf club, that, what are their needs with regard to water and all of those other items that, maybe people aren't really thinking about. This is tremendous. I've read it 4 or 5 times over the last couple of days, and every time I read it, I focus in on something new. And so just thank you so much for your efforts, because, we're really at a critical state at this point with global warming and, all of the environmental impacts and concerns that we have in the community. So you're right on point, and thank you so much.
Thank
And
you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about, what we have down the road.
I'd like to mention too, you mentioned the, the insect borne diseases and, things that may not have made the top priority list, but they're identified, right? And so
Right.
that doesn't mean that we can't work with our public health department on how are we educating people, just as an example. So, so thank you, because I feel like this report does identify a lot, and the more, I worked on it and went through this information, or, talking about our businesses in town, our farms in town, like, how are we, as leaders and staff able to support them when there's a drought or a flood, and, have we really thought about that? So even though they weren't necessarily identified as top priorities, they're still, there as discussion items, especially for all of us sitting at this table, I guess, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Yes, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'll probably read it another 3 times and get something else.
yeah,
So
and if you
I
have
may
more.
call you.
Yes,
so.
please do, yes.
Yeah, but thank you, Doreen, so
Sure.
very much.
Sure.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Mr. Chairman.
Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just can't say enough about how great this process is. the amount of effort that it goes into planning one of these, I know myself, I do this kind of work in the corporate space, and it's a tremendous amount of work to plan even just a couple hour session. So doing a 2-day is a lot of work and requires a lot of time, effort, and people. I'd also like to acknowledge, to Wendy's point, Blackstone National for providing the space, and now I hear about the food that they provided as well. I think that's great, and also their participation as well. And also I'd like to acknowledge the 24 community members that showed up. And really, without them, like, we would probably miss things. Like, I think it's really important that it's a collaborative effort between the community, businesses, and the town government. And we all need to work on this together. And I think having them there to help us identify these things and kind of help us understand the priority of these. Because I can sit here with my opinion, but it's just based on, my perception. And I think having more people look at that makes it more of a fact than just my opinion. So I think that's really important. And the list is how it fell, the trees being a big issue. Absolutely, especially like where I see a lot of dead ash trees along the side of the road because of insect borne diseases for the trees. The issue that we had in Oxford, right just past the Sutton line, was it last year? With someone being killed by a branch falling out of the trees on a windy day. Like, a lot of our roads are covered over, and I often wonder on those days when I'm driving, down my road that, should I be driving right now? So I think it's really good for us to take a look at that. But I think what's so great about this is that it builds awareness, and then through awareness we can do something. When these are kind of just hidden issues or issues that are in someone's mind, but we haven't really sat down to think about them, it's hard to put together plans. This allows us to actually start to prioritize, put together a plan, and put together a strategy how we're going to get that done. So some of it will be funding from the town, some of it will be a combination of grants and funding from the town, or so it's going to give us a strategy of how to deal with it. So I think that's super important as well. And then, like you said, we also have a list, what we would call like a backlog of items that are still there and important, but they're in our consciousness. We can still deal with them, but I think having these 4 are really important, and I agree with all 4 of them as priorities for the town. It's just incredibly good work, both for the standpoint of sustainability and resiliency during, as we kind of go over the next few years, but also for right now as well, in non-events that we solve these issues, because it's better to do it now than doing it in crisis. So we're being proactive. So
exactly, and I think that was the point of the the state funding, the state looking forward, and just saying, what can we be proactive with?
Yeah, sometimes I can get a little frustrated with the state, kind of, bringing these things down upon us. But I think this is one of those programs that I think is a worthwhile endeavor for. I actually don't think I know in my mind is a worthwhile endeavor that I think will reap benefits for the town and also the region and the state as a whole. I think it's smart that we're being proactive about this. And dealing with issues, just even with our aging infrastructure. I mean, we're an older part of the country, and we're aging, and that puts us even more in a vulnerable place as climate change continues to happen. So, again, I appreciate the work, and I'm excited to see, our plan as we move forward and we deal with some of these challenges. And I think it also is bringing new insights into me as well about, especially like this transit pipe in Wilkes. Like, that's something we're going to need to understand to address, because that could impact, as we continue to work through how we're going to bring sewer up to the center of town.
Right.
There could be an impact there, because that's
Yes.
something I am concerned about is there capacity through the system to be able to handle the additional flow potentially from the school and from the center of town. So it's good to know that we're now addressing that. It's become a prioritized item, right on top of the list. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions, a lot actually, and I wrote them in all
Sure.
different angles, so I'm
Great.
going to have to. So when I read this through, the first time I read through, I was thinking about just the topic of climate change, which is a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on it, and I was particularly going through things like dams failing, tree issues coming down, and because those things have happened forever.
Mm-hmm.
But this is really addressing exacerbations of weather issues on all these different conditions. And I think to me, that was the big distinction with this as opposed to just normal weather issues. So in that context, though, I didn't know, did the state give you any guidance in terms of these are the things that we see happening, and how do these type of events, how will they impact your town? Or is it just whatever you guys think is?
So two things. I had to go through a 2-day training program with the state in order to kind of understand the guidelines of this MVP project before I could go through this whole procedure. So it was one of the things that was required to do. And during that time, and any information I've had since, they do not do that because communities are very different. If you think about especially coastal communities, they're going to have very different priorities than central Massachusetts. So, again, we went with, okay, we did a hazard mitigation plan, which is similar. It's not, to the context of, major storms, but we do have, identified flooding and drought and winter storms, and came to the conclusion, and I did give the workshop group the opportunity to, if they wanted to add to that, they could, and we didn't. But the state does not say, here, you should pick some of these. Now, if all the reports are available online on the state website, on the MVP website, and Sutton's will be, once it's given to EEA this week. And if you read through different communities surrounding, they are similar in Central Mass, but we were given, we were kind of given the opportunity to come up with our own.
Okay.
Let me just add that going through this process, it was another planning process similar to the hazard mitigation plan, and we were sort of saying, here's another planning process that we got to go through. But this one was unique in that a lot of the issues that you saw addressed during the 2-day meeting are, brought it to my attention and brought it to a higher level of, now the board is aware of all these issues, and we've talked about tree maintenance, we've talked about these things, which are ordinary things and things that we should be addressing, and we've put together a plan on how we're going to address it in future capital plans. But the transite pipe is a real issue, and whether it qualifies for a Mass Works grant or through EEA, it's an issue that needs to be addressed, and we are addressing it. At Maytown meeting, we got funding for, essentially an I&I, which is inflow and infiltration, and the whole purpose of that was to camera that length of that transite pipe. And once we get the results of that, then we can start planning on how we're going to fix that, whether we're going to put a new pipe adjacent to that one, abandon it, whatever we're going to do. And that's potentially a grant application. Now, whether it's truly climate change that is the reason we're doing this, it might just be bringing a project to the public's awareness that it needs to be done. So the process in that context was valuable to the town and myself going through that.
I had a thought on that, just in terms of the priorities of how, the ranking of those priorities. And to me, when I looked at those different priorities, I agreed with, they're all things that we should focus on. I just wasn't sure about the order of them, that where something like the transite pipe failing seems to be potentially more catastrophic result with that as opposed to the tree maintenance.
So again, these are findings, right? I didn't really have a say, nor did I want to, as a facilitator, tell people what I think their priorities should be.
Yeah.
And, going up a table at a time and letting people identify what they thought was the priority, this is what came out of that.
Yeah.
So it is interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because I would agree with you. but these are the findings,
Yeah.
so. yeah.
Does that impact what we have to do first?
No, no.
We're just identifying.
We're just identifying.
So we're going to address the leak at Stevens Pond Dam. Fall town meeting, we're gonna put some money aside in the capital to hire a consultant to address that issue. Start addressing it. And the trees, we're gonna address that through the capital plan. So a lot of these are town issues that we're gonna address just with the available funds that we have. The bigger issue is the transite pipe, where we don't have the resources, in my opinion, to do that whole job, and we will need the assistance of the state. And that will be probably our big grant application through either EEA or MassWorks.
Okay.
Or both, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I do have a few more, sorry.
No,
Hopefully I don't go over my time, but, and I think I read, I don't know if it was in your report or somewhere else, I seem to read these things and not write them down, and I probably should have. But the grants that are allowed or contemplated under this program, is it a 3-to-1 match on the grants? Is that something I read somewhere?
Not to my knowledge for this, yeah.
If that's the case, then, we have a significant amount of money in the sewer department, retained earnings and
Yep.
connection fees.
Yep.
I think the connection fees is, well over $500,000. So we're in a position that we can match these funds, but coming up with all that money up front.
Yeah, I just thought I read somewhere that it was a 25%, they were looking for a 25% match on the state.
Yeah.
I mean, from the town.
I would take
But,
that deal.
Yeah, I would too.
You
I
got
just
it.
didn't,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if I had that right or not.
Jeff, I'll look into that
Okay.
and get you the answer to that.
Okay.
I don't think so, but I'm not positive
Okay.
on that answer.
And then the dams, this is just public the town-owned dams, right?
Correct.
So private,
Private dams were brought up in the discussion. There's really, I mean, I guess there could be potentially a policy change on, on fixing dams. I had many conversations with the planning director on, how we go about doing that, and there hasn't really been a solution. So yes, there are private dams in town that the town is not maintaining that need some work.
okay.
But these are just concentrating on what the town
Okay.
is responsible for.
And my last question, I promise, is there any way that flooding issues or our lack of a sewer to the town hall can be somehow incorporated into a grant?
Say that question again?
Can our lack of a sewer system from going up Boston Road to town hall somehow be incorporated into a grant under this program?
It is possible. There is a connection between floods and failed septic systems. That can really create a public health issue, not only for just surface water, but the groundwater as well, contaminating that with pollutants and so forth. So that is a possibility. To answer your question.
Okay. Maybe it's a culvert or something that we can.
Yeah,
clean
it
up
might
in
be a
there,
little
or-
bit of a stretch, considering what we're planning, but, it's not totally out of the question, because ultimately the impact of adding a sewer and people connecting to that sewer prevents flooding from, exposing failed septic
Yeah.
systems.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Good point.
Thank you. So, the one thing I would say is I think we have a really good board. I have a whole bunch of questions written down, and you guys sort of touched on all of them, so thank you. This won't take me too long. Interestingly enough, we had a tree come down today and cross a roadway, so that trees would be a topic tonight, apropos, I guess. I think we've talked about it a lot, but, at one point, I thought this was really a process that would, it was really just a grant process. It's a way for us to take advantage of some things that the state was offering. and help us do some things. And obviously the headline from Millbury with a $1 million grant and a visit from the governor seemed like a pretty good thing. But it also seems apparent that, as Jim mentioned, the process was really informative and was a vehicle to allow us to become aware of some things that maybe we weren't aware of without having done this. And that's evidenced by the fact that you're recommending that we're moving forward with some things before we even think about getting grants, that there are some priorities to deal with now. So, just, I would say, a really valuable process. And you had, as Jonathan mentioned, a really esteemed group there. And so as I read this, and I have some questions, as Jeff did, about priorities, you know, I feel good at least that you had a really qualified group sort of contemplate these things and make some solid recommendations. But, you know, I was curious about trees as well. Only in this context, we talked about where the original hazard mitigation plan was, and I didn't reread it for this purpose, but I don't remember trees really being a particular thing, and yet it sort of made its way to the top of the list in your process. So, did they pick it up under some things that were already in the original mitigation plan? Was that part of droughts and wildfires, for example, or?
So I did have copies of the hazard mitigation plan on every table, and I did reread the hazard mitigation plan before the workshop, but sadly right now I can't recall if trees are in there or not. But again, there, as far as my facilitation to the group, I didn't make mention of one thing or another, trying to persuade them in one way or the other, and all 3 or 4 tables identified trees as a hazard priority.
Yeah,
You know,
no,
one
just-
of the issues might have been, you know, the makeup of the group. I, you know, off the top of my head, I can recall at least half a dozen that I know have had dead tree issues on their property. And it also, the hazard mitigation plan was done a few years ago. The accident where that gentleman was killed on just over the line in Oxford was really on people's
Sure, front and
minds. So I think that sort of helped bring it to the top of the list, in my opinion.
May I make a comment as well about?
Sure.
So I think as we've been talking about this, what also reminded me too is it's been a while since we've had a major storm that's taken out a lot of trees. And I can remember not too distant past when we had an ice storm, a major snowstorm early in the season, and a hurricane within a short period of time where all 3 times I was out of power for almost a week. So I think we've kind of forgotten about like that when we do have these major storms, it can wreak major devastation on our trees, on our roads, and then impact the power, which not only puts people at risk who have health issues, but also slows down the economics of the region and obviously damage and all that kind of thing. So I think that's something we haven't had a storm like that in a while.
Yeah.
And it's something like every time they start talking about like a potential hurricane coming up here, like I get nervous about, because I remember what it's been like being without power for 4 or 5 days, and having to live off of a generator, which I'm lucky enough to have and purchase because I was out of it so much. But I think I'm constantly trying to maintain that, and it's so that's something we've got to be thinking about, is that we may not have anything right now pressing, but I do think that's something that is more likely to happen than we remember. That it will happen again. We'll have another major snowstorm or a major maybe a hurricane come up the coast and create damage that we haven't had in a while. So I think I do see why this ends up on the list, not only just from a standpoint of we've got dead trees that could hurt somebody, but also the fact that when we do have major storms, if we have a lot of trees that are in rough shape over the roads, it's just that much more that can come down on the lines. And the bigger the event, the longer it's going to take for that to be mitigated. And especially if it's a regional wide thing, it could go on for quite some time. As we saw, like in some of the ice storms we've had in the northern part of the state, sometimes it went for 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
So I think, you know, just remembering that makes me think about that this is a really important topic on the list, on top of what we were just talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, from my perspective, it really wasn't about whether it should or shouldn't have been on the list. I kind of agreed that it should be on the list. I just thought that the participants, whether they admitted it or not, really, I think, were adding to their own set of priorities around various hazards that they saw.
Sure,
You
yeah.
know, so maybe even beyond what the original hazard mitigation plan had said, maybe.
Mhm.
And you know, I think to your point, Jonathan, the generators thing to me is a really important idea.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
with the heat that we had this weekend, I could imagine places like the senior center or possibly the school being some kind of shelter for people that maybe don't have air conditioning. And if we had lost power somehow during that period of time, having backup generators to continue to support those people would have been really important, so.
Right.
You know, and the bigger issue, when I looked at that, knowing that we just spent a significant amount of money in upgrading the public safety communications, that 2 of our major tower sites don't have a backup generator associated with them, either at Wilkes or down in Manchog. So both of those, we lose power to those sites, then we lose communications to this town. So the seriousness of the issue has risen a lot higher.
Sure, yeah. And then you had some representation from the business community, the golf course, you had Whittier's there.
Yes.
Did you get a feeling that there was significantly different types of issues coming from that community versus either public safety officials or people that might have been thinking more in terms of residential or?
Well, I divided the groups so that, you know, the public safety were sitting at the same table as Whittier Farm, or so, you know, so they had to have those discussions together. And because I was facilitating the entire event, I wasn't really privy to, you know, individual table conversations. Having one-on-one conversations with them before and after the workshops, you know, their concern is obviously, you know, like the farms, anytime there's a drought or a flood, it's going to hurt their business, hurt their
Sure.
farm. And same thing with Blackstone National. You know, they talk about they've already had issues in hot weather. Last year was an issue where there was a drought, and you know, all the grass turns brown and it's unusable. And so where are they getting water from? And then the opposite issue happens if it's, you know, flooding. So the season can become shorter, and what are we doing about that? So,
Interesting.
you know, so the first responders in the group were typically talking about emergency management, as they should, right? How are we going to get along on roadways? How are we going to help people? What if there are trees down blocking it? What if people can't get to a shelter because roads are closed? Communication lines. So it was, I think, interesting and important to put some of those people at the same table,
Yeah, I think
to
so.
kind of have the time to work out and hear other people's priorities as well. And I feel like everything, and that was kind of the purpose of the whole map that was done, because everything was written out. It wasn't, you know, for the table, well, pick your top 3. It was write them out. Every person had an opportunity. And then that list, I think there was 64 on the Excel list that I put on a giant piece of paper and taped up in the room. They had stickers to pick from each of those, and those were the 4 that came out of it.
So you get 4 items to send to the state, but there's a lot more things to
There's
think
a lot
about
more.
beyond that.
Yep. And they're all listed in the report.
And just one last thing, I want to pick up on something Jeff was talking about, the private dams.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do we feel, given the number of them and the fact that we have sort of no control over and possibly visibility into how much maintenance has been done and what the state of those dams are, it seems like a bigger problem than our own dams. Do you have any sense of whether the state will provide any assistance with those kinds of problems, or?
You know, as far as EEA, I don't know, because I haven't gone through the grant process with them. That'll happen once we're awarded. I think that's a really good question for Jen Hager to answer. I mean, she and I have had a lot of discussions on that, and you know, perhaps something the board can think about as a policy issue for the town. You know, as far as the state, I'm happy to look into that information. Jen's definitely the expert on that.
Feels like a topic that needs some research.
Yeah, you know, just off the cuff, I'm not interested in taking over private dams. You know, we've got our hands full already with, you know, 2 large dams in town, and we're having issues with one of them, and, you know, it's gonna cost us $17,000 just to figure out what's going on out there at Stevens Pond. And Manchog Pond, you know, it has a few issues that have been resolved by using operating funds, not touching the $350,000 that Interface gave us some 8 years ago. So, you know, individuals that purchase a property that has a dam on it, they are aware that a dam is on that property. They accept responsibility for that dam, and for the town to come in and you know, say, we're gonna take it over from you, and it just doesn't seem right thing from a policy standpoint.
Yeah, no, I guess I would think that way as well. It's just a question of whether we have some influence over or knowledge about how well they are being maintained, because that likely has some impact to the town and
You know, we're really talking about small bodies of water, versus, you know, Manchog and Stevens Pond,
Sure.
larger bodies.
Sure, okay.
May I ask a question on that? So do we have a list of the private dams that are in town, and then the subsequent potential risk of their failure and kind of the state that they're in?
Yeah, the state does, I don't know whether it's biannual, every 2 years, they do a report of dams. We don't get a copy of the private dams. There is a reporting process necessary for those dams, that they're required to report to the state the conditions of those dams. But that's kind of a self-reporting process. We report every 2 years on the 2 dams that the town owns.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Doreen, thank you. I think, you know, reading the board here, I think I feel safe in speaking for my colleagues to say that that's excellent work that's been done, and we really appreciate it, and I think we're learning a ton from it, and we'll continue to learn, and hopefully the state will help us out with some projects going forward. So, thank you for all of your work.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming in
Thanks
so
for
late
your
at night.
support. No, I'm happy to.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
thanks.
Doreen.
Thank you. All right, I think we're on to our town manager's update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few updates for the board. First is Central Turnpike repaving. The bids were due last Friday, but we had to postpone those bids due to some issues and questions that came up on an addendum that was issued. Just quantity of rock necessary, riprap for the drainage, minor issues, but rather than move forward and deal with somebody contesting the bid award, we decided to move the bid forward to this Friday. So bids will be open Friday at 11 a.m. Library sidewalk project, bids are currently out to bid. You know, the project will repair this concrete sidewalks, raise the catch basin, make it more handicap accessible, put some footings in for future cover over the library entrance, so the rain doesn't fall straight on patrons' heads as they're entering that entrance. The bids are due this Thursday at 11 a.m. We did have the individual doing the school sidewalks submit a bid today, Matero Construction, which is good news. So hopefully that's positive on Thursday. 4th of July Parade Committee, the committee will be coming before the Board of Selectmen at the next meeting, August 6th, to give a recap of the event and to discuss next year's 4th of July project. So they did a terrific job, as we've talked about in the past, but they're already moving forward and planning for next year's event, and I think they've even selected a day. So, you know, we can now kind of meet with them and discuss the process and how everything went from the board's perspective. The new police station opening was held on Saturday, July 13th at 10 a.m. The Dudley Gendron Post started off the ceremony with raising the flag, which I thought was a beautiful touch. Jesse Lemanek, who's chaplain for Post 414, gave a blessing to the department, and obviously Selectman Mead, also chairperson of the Police Station Building Committee, cut the blue ribbon.
With some difficulty.
Yeah, well, that was a challenge, but you did a nice job. And after the short speaking program, the police department gave tours going well into the afternoon. So it was a well-attended event, and I think the public appreciated that. And we obviously appreciated the public support of this project, as everybody mentioned that day. And one last item, the reappointment to the Recreation Commission. Amy Parsekian, who was a current member of the Recreation Commission, failed to get her paperwork in. But we would like to appoint Amy, back to the Recreation Commission. We thank her for continuing willingness to serve in that position, just as an update.
Great.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, as always, Jim. Unfortunate that we had a little delay in the bid on the Central Turnpike job, but I'm still very confident that we'll be ahead of the weather, and
Yeah.
very excited to get that done, because dear gosh, we really need that. I am so excited that the 4th of July committee has already booked a date, booked buildings, like they are right on top of things, and I am so excited that they're excited to do it again.
Yeah.
Because it was such a big undertaking, it could have been overwhelming and scared people away. But they have really stepped up and owned it, and I'm so excited. Police station opening was great. Ribbon was really big.
So were the scissors.
But they weren't sharp. But I just want to say we had a very brief series of statements from people, and so the tours literally went until 2:30 in the afternoon, after our 10 o'clock speeches. So I was so exciting. I had to keep running back in and grabbing the chief and saying, there's more people, there's 6 more people, someone else needs a tour. I was so excited. I mean, the whole concept of my little talk that day was about community, and that was really what the day was about, was community, from supporting it at town meeting all the way through. I'm stating officially retired from all building committees. I just want to put that out there. Shush. But just thank you to the community for being so supportive, and our officers are so deserving. So thank you so much, and thank you to Amy for all of our volunteers on our committees are really giving back again to our community, and so thank you very much. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one question around the Central Turnpike repaving. So the fact that we were delayed a week, does that mean we'll be delayed on the other end and getting started, or do you think?
Yeah, I mean, a week's time is not gonna make a major difference. I'm assuming once we get the bids opening on Friday, that we will issue a contract within, a 10-day period of time, and a notice to proceed. And then it's just, whoever wins the bid determining when they have the time within their projects that are currently ongoing to get the project done. It sort of depends on what projects are going on for that contractor
Right.
at that time. But, all the contractors that are qualified to take out bids on this project, the Lynch's, Keating, Amarello, they're large contractors, and they all have access to, significant asphalt plants, and so I'm not concerned about it. Any one of them would be a great contractor to work with.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
I'm equally excited to have the 4th of July parade committee come in before us and share, their excitement about, the day and their learnings and what they're hoping to do next year. I'm excited to start to see as they start to plan that out. I'm really excited that I personally had a great experience, and I'm really looking forward to the committee coming in before us and talking to us about it. New police station opening, I regret that I was not able to attend. I was in Maine on a prior planned vacation with my family, but I heard just how great it was, and the support from the community was overwhelmingly positive, and just excited to see the support we had, and the fact that there was so many tours that were required to just keep going on shows that people were interested and wanted to experience the new station. And I also, again, would like to thank Amy for volunteering her time. Without the volunteers, we wouldn't be able to really run the town, so I really appreciate her participation. So, thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to know that we did get a bid on the sidewalk project.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is great. I am actually also very interested in hearing from the 4th of July parade committee, just from their perspective, what went right, what didn't, and whatever changes they may have for next year. Because from my perspective, I didn't notice anything that went wrong.
Yeah.
You know, so it'd be interesting to hear from them, and hopefully they're not too hard on themselves, because I think they did a great job. Police station was great. We spent a couple hours, 2.5 hours there, I think. And it's an impressive building, an impressive facility. The town should be proud of it, and it's not an extravagance. It was needed, and it should serve the town well for a long time. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna jump right to the police station. I felt exactly what you just said. I think, the town should be proud. It really is, a beautiful building. It's right-sized, it's functional, and I was really happy to see the turnout. I think for, like you said, we all said it, Wendy, but the town gave us the opportunity to do this, and I was really happy that so many people took the opportunity to come out and see what it is that they built. So actually, Jeff and I had a tour from Officer Jakes, who was a great tour guide, and Maynard gave us a little off-the-record tour. We got into the communications room a little bit, and it's daunting in that room. There's a lot of stuff going on. So, but appreciation to all of them. The police were so generous with their time and were really great tour guides. So, Wendy, congratulations. It really was a great project. It went very well. So, that's what I have. Before we move on to the roundtable, we do now have a representative here from Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce, that event. We've passed this agenda item, so it's really up to the board if you want to entertain it now. And
I will say I was in the wrong meeting.
Wrong meeting room.
Sorry.
So if you guys are good, we can.
I have no objection.
No objections either.
Great, why don't you come on up? I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say. at the
No,
beginning.
not really. I just as soon hear from Julia, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, can you introduce yourself for the record?
Julia Jeskovich from the Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce.
Okay. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the event?
Sure. So this is a business after hours that we're holding for one of our newest members, CrossFit AC, right here in Sutton. And it's basically just a networking event where we invite our members. They connect on a professional level, hopefully do some business. We always have appetizers from a caterer, and here specifically for the liquor license so that we can serve alcohol at the event. Atlas Distributors will be distributing the alcohol, and that's where we're getting it from. They're donating it, and the member, CrossFit AC, is getting the caterer.
Well, I'll let the members ask, I guess, so. Wendy, go ahead if you have
Thanks so
questions.
much. Yes, so 2 questions sort of pop into my head. First of all, thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you.
Number 1, will the servers be tip certified?
Yes, we do have a tip certified bartender who serves at our holiday event, and she has agreed to do this event as well.
Okay, great. And Jim, this might be a question for you just because I don't know the answer. Is there an impact of a distributor donating alcohol versus the commission buying the alcohol? And I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, we're not exactly sure on that. I apologize. I mean, that's just a question that we need to answer. So,
Is this typically how you do it at these events?
Yes.
And the alcohol's donated
Yeah.
typically?
I guess just my concern is I don't know what the ABCC regulations are with regard to donated alcohol. no one's ever donated alcohol to me, so I have no idea.
It is a good question. You know, independent of the board action, if you vote to approve this, pending the, you know, whether they can accept donated alcohol or not. If they can, if the board recommends this, then we will just issue the license. But otherwise, we will hold off on it. We've got another meeting on
Yeah, we have another
August
month.
6th. Is who a nonprofit?
Is that a nonprofit?
Yeah, we're a not-for-profit, and we have a 501c3 organization within the chamber, the Central Mass Center for Business.
All right, that just helps us ask the question.
Sure.
So-
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I guess those are just the two questions that really popped into my mind. Outside of those two technical issues, I like the concept. CrossFit AC has already been a good partner to the community, and I'm really glad to see them here. So, thank you for that, and any follow-up that you can provide, Jim, would be greatly appreciated.
Sure.
That's all, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question I have is, have you held an event like this in Sutton before?
Well, I will say I've been with the chamber for about 3 years, and I don't recall us having an after-hours in Sutton since I've been there.
They actually, if I can just interject, down in the Mills in Manchug,
Right.
they had a wine tasting.
Oh, that's right. We
Yeah,
have our
that
holiday
involved
hours
all
there.
of the galleries and all of the other vendors in the Mills. It was
It's been
hugely
a
attended.
few years since we've done that, and I
Yeah.
haven't done it since I've been here.
Yeah. But I attended that, so
Yeah.
that's just why. I
So
recall.
there's some precedence of an
Mhm.
event like this in Sutton already? Okay, thank you. I think the other question I have is, I know with a lot of other events, there's usually a police officer present. Are you planning on that as well, or?
That could be arranged. I don't know that it's confirmed right now, but it can certainly be arranged.
I mean, the difference between this and Dudley Gendron, that Dudley Gendron is an outside event where the public interacts with, and they can just come off the sidewalk, and, that's where we feel it's necessary for police officers. This is an inside event, kind of controlled by both the business and the chamber, so we don't feel a detail office is needed for this event, but
Yeah,
it's just our thoughts.
yeah, that's helpful. And, yeah, that was my other question, was it's gonna be all inside, so,
Yes.
okay. That's all I have for right now, thank you.
Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really, the only question that hasn't been addressed already, it goes back to that first one about donating. That was, because that was the first thing that kind of, when you said it was being donated, that kind of caught my attention, because I, just in reviewing kind of the agenda and preparing for it tonight, I thought, again, it's one of those things I thought I read, but maybe I didn't read that it could not be donated.
I think I recall it
will
coming
it-
up as a question regarding
Yeah.
the 4th of July parade, so.
I
that's-
thought so as well, yeah.
But I don't know the answer.
Yeah, and, we'll get the answer.
Yep.
So that was really the question that hasn't been addressed by Wendy and Jonathan, so.
Okay. I just want to go back to the tip certified bartender. So, it sounds to me like you do these events on a regular basis, and this is from the same pool of bartenders that do it all the time. So they're
Exactly.
familiar with the rules, and,
Yes.
you've not had issues in any other communities
No.
that you've done this in, and everything's gone fine.
Yep.
So that's all I really have. I think, as Wendy said, this is a perfectly good event with a nice community partner, and I'm sure it'll go fine. So I guess
Can I just ask one question?
you may.
Would it be appropriate to amend the motion to include a statement with regard to it being contingent upon a final decision on the donation of alcohol / beer / wine?
Yeah, that's fine, except if the answer is it can't be donated, then it sort of leaves the question open. Are you giving my office the authority to work with them and make sure that they're charging
That
for
everything
the
is in
alcohol?
compliance?
Assuming the board's okay with this license, other than that one issue.
What if we made it contingent upon approval or, excuse me, just thinking out loud,
Yeah, yeah.
contingent upon being in accordance with all ABCC guidelines? And I think that would leave it to you to determine if indeed they were.
Okay. And, you know, ultimately, we have another board meeting prior to this event, so if things don't go well with the ABCC, the board can revisit it in the August 6th meeting.
How do you feel about that, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I just don't wanna hang them on anything. I don't wanna hang us on anything, so. My presumption is if we approve this, then we approve it with the knowledge, or with the expectation that it's all gonna be done according to ABCC rules. So we have a question about this one particular thing, we'll research that and make sure that it's okay, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of communication with you about
Right.
that. And so, I'm happy to add language if you want to, I'm not sure I feel it's necessary, because that's incumbent upon the applicant to make sure that they're, within those rules.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Are we talking about this being an ABCC rule or a Town of Sutton
It's
policy?
not Town of
It's
Sutton.
ABCC.
So ABCC, so wouldn't that be consistent through all the towns? So like, is there like, what's the risk
Presumably.
here? So if they're doing this in other towns, I would hope that they would be checking in on that as well. So what I'm just saying is the risk is great of it kind of not working out because of the rules, because
It's just an unknown.
Right, it's an unknown, but I'm assuming that's probably, if other towns are allowing it in a very similar fashion, I gotta imagine, hopefully, there would be an ABCC
Would
rule.
have been caught by now,
Yeah,
you
would
would
be caught by now.
expect.
So I'm just
But-
making that as a point of, as we're
Mhm.
if we decide to vote on this, that the risk is relatively low, because there's always a chance, and how do we mitigate that, but.
Well, I guess I'm open to it either way, if you have some language that we think would work.
I'm just taking a quick look at the application. Just give me one second.
We are thinking that, you know, just Deb and I talking, that they are a nonprofit, so chances are that the ABCC gives consideration for donations to a nonprofit. There are other people out there that are not nonprofits and that
Right.
have run into this issue. So I don't wanna talk about, you know, what those parties are, but I believe there's probably some consideration for the nonprofit, so, but we're unsure of that
Just gonna check
particular
on
issue.
it, yeah.
So assuming everything is okay, then we will issue the license if the board approves it tonight. If there's any issue, I will talk to you, Mr. Chairman, and the chamber and figure out some solution in the meantime. I mean, it's really whether they have to purchase the alcohol or it's donated. But I don't think that'll have an impact on whether the event goes forward or not.
Agreed.
Question for you. If we do approve it on that contingent basis, are we signing the license tonight?
If we sign the license, you would still hold it and not actually issue it.
And the alternative is to wait till our next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, we can't issue the license until we clear up this question anyway, so I don't know how you would deliver the license to the chamber. So it just comes down to an administrative
No.
issue.
I have no issue with that.
I'm sorry?
I have no issue with that.
You know, I think at the end of the day, that's my feeling. I think we can do all of this stuff, and I have full confidence that the town manager's office will handle this appropriately and administratively take care of what needs to be taken care of, so. But that's, you know, it's up to us as a board.
But
so.
to Jonathan's point, the chamber has run these events across a number of communities in Blackstone Valley for a number of years.
Somebody would have come across this issue, you would
So
think.
that's my thinking.
Yeah. But I guess with that understanding, if you guys are comfortable with it, we can take a vote.
Mhm.
So I would need a motion. Are you okay with that?
You know, I'm okay with it. I don't know if we're gonna, what the language that we're gonna put into that motion. Or we just gonna approve it as is and then let the town manager.
You can do what you want. I'm just saying, my personal opinion is we can vote this the way that it is, because I don't see that we're gonna actually issue the license until we're clear that this issue's
That's
been
fine, sure.
resolved.
Agree.
Then, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the one-day beer and wine alcohol license request for the Blackstone Chamber of Commerce Business After Hours event to be held at CrossFit located at 64 Worcester Providence Turnpike on Wednesday, August 21, 2019, from 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Tip certified bartender to be on site.
Second.
That's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry you ended up in the wrong room.
Oh, it's okay. Small brain.
Thank you.
Would you
All
like
right.
me to stick around, or?
No, you don't need to.
No,
You're
you're
good.
good. Thank you so
Have a good
much.
night.
So the only thing left on the agenda is just roundtable and correspondence and announcements. So, Wendy.
I just have one thing, Mr. Chairman. This past Sunday, I was honored to be able to present 2 new Eagle Scouts with their certificate of recognition that Jesse read into the record at our last meeting. It was a really wonderful ceremony. I'm the aunt of an Eagle Scout, so I really appreciate the tremendous amount of work that goes into this. And I'd just like to recognize again Nicholas Reed and JP Capuano, and also really importantly their families. I think they were critical to them getting to the point that they got to, and they've really provided the senior center in Mendon, and then the nature trail out behind the school complex. They worked tremendously hard on those, and they had a really great little competition going on with who got more merit badges by what date. It was really kind of cute. But I was just really, really happy to be there. And, as a side note, it was one of those things. I posted a picture on the Sutton site, which sometimes can be really divisive. And it was so wonderful to see, almost 200 people congratulating them. So just congratulations to them and their family, and thank you. That's all I have for tonight.
Great. Thank you for representing us there. Jonathan.
I have nothing to add for tonight. Thank you.
Jeff?
The only thing that I have really is just been thinking this week about the goals meeting and how to move forward with some of those goals that we talked about at our last meeting. So other than that, nothing for tonight.
And actually, that's the only thing I wanted to mention. I just wanted to give my appreciation not only to Jim for listening to us, but really for the committee to take some time and think through those issues. And I think we had some good, healthy discussions, and some of it had some applicability here tonight. So thank you very much. That's all I have, and all I can say now is that clearly this is not John's board anymore, because we would have been out here a long time ago.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.